Right, so we were talking before about martial arts, and I talked about, or I said traditional martial arts, and I compared traditional martial arts to a sort of modern or sport-based martial arts. I thought it was interesting you said you didn't like the term traditional martial, or you didn't use it. You used the term classical martial arts
Yeah,
instead. So I wondered if you could sort of explain your rationale on that.
yeah. Well, tradition to me, kind of, it can denote pointless ritual for the sake of it.
Okay.
But stuff that's been handed down from centuries before that everybody's forgotten the meaning of, but still get included. And then, of course, if everybody's forgotten the meaning, they don't have any relevance. So I prefer the term classical for sure.
Because you're kind of talking about sort of cultural baggage in a way, rituals and
Yeah, but I like cultural baggage as long as it has a perceived meaning or an understanding. But once the understanding's lost and it just becomes pure ritual, I think it might even hold some significance in terms of control, a person controlling their body to do something. But I think because of the nature of martial arts, that everything within the practice must have a practical meaning, a practical purpose. And in the classical arts, that's most certainly so.
So maybe you could. So it may be some of these things that I can see your point that you would call traditional. Maybe some traditions that have been kept. Maybe they originally had a function, and somewhere along that's lost. And
I think that's true.
And I often wonder how much of that has happened because as well of sort of transfer from one culture to another. Because there's definitely a difference. Having lived half my life in the West and half my life in the East, I can see a very difference in the cultures. And I think as well that in the Far East, that it's more like the West now anyway. In a lot of parts of the world, they've adopted Western culture. They've sort of modernized and
which has actually been going on for a long
say.
time. For over 100 years, that's been going on. That the East wanted information from the West and
vice versa.
And took on sports science and the like, and sort of melded it into their martial systems.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, I can see it very much in Taoism, especially in the Taoist arts. It's got to the point where I wouldn't even identify as such a thing anymore, a Taoist, because I feel that the Taoist traditions are, according to how you're defining it, I would agree. I like this term because it feels like there's a lot of empty ritual and traditions that don't have any meaning in modern times.
I mean, I think within yourself, if you're studying, it's still a good idea to record them. And have knowledge of what at some stage you could consider to be empty ritual, because certainly perspective changes as time passes, you know. And so when people discard things, certainly people at a beginner's level, novice level and an intermediate level, certainly in the martial arts, people suddenly think they know it all and they say, no, this is all rubbish, this is all, but then had they studied another 10 years, they would have access to that information as well, and it would have started to make sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and Westerners are terrible for this.
Yes.
They just are. They just are. Every logic has to be in accordance with their perspective of life.
And the assumptions that the position that you can logically understand it from the beginning is always going to be the place you can logically understand it, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it makes me laugh, like... on a level of karate, people, the most common thing people say from other systems is karate people are easy to deal with because they just leave their arms there.
Oh, right.
Where of course you don't put a punching arm out or any configuration of movement of it, hold it in position. This is just to protect, to practice getting into that position. But if somebody studies the system for maybe 6 months, 9 months, they could, if they're not too bright, imagine that was the truth. And then of course, at a beginner level, martial artist is easy for anybody to deal with, much easier than somebody that hasn't trained at all, because a clumsy person might well knock you out, whereas a badly trained person would not be very good at it at all. So, so people have build their perspective of things on a prejudice against things with too little information. I think that's a human trait anyway.
So how would you
know.
define a classical art in comparison to this then?
The classical art, well, a very easy way, a very short-winded way, is to classical music as opposed to pop music.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I would say that modern martial systems are like pop music. Everybody likes the melody, the tune, they get into it very easy. Whereas classical music has depth, meaning, perception, time, And I'm not a classical music fan, but still I'm a classical arts fan for sure. Yeah. So this would incorporate so much more than just the mechanical function of the martial art. Is the nature of the person is in accord, and there are levels of self-control, there are levels of emotional intelligence. Yeah.
Okay.
Classical.
Right. So if you compare that, I suppose the modern version, that would be sort of sport fighting, which a lot of people would think of MMA or even boxing, I guess, or something like this.
Yeah.
It's been around for a long time, but it's not even just within those arts, is it? I mean, even the Japanese arts, well, Chinese arts too, but went into like a sport version of karate, right?
Yeah. In order to popularize karate, as it left the shores of Okinawa, its birthplace, whereby it was in what place it was actually a self-defense system, a civilian self-defense system, which had been developed by bodyguards of the kings and queens of Okinawa into a very brutal method of self-protection.
Okay.
And then of course when it needed to be, wished it to be popularized throughout the world, basically for its survival. It was becoming very marginalized even in Okinawa. They had to put a sporting element because it needed to be popularized through schools and universities and the like. And then obviously everybody perceived that system as a sporting system, whereas it most certainly isn't. I think karate is a terrible sport.
Right.
It doesn't make a good sport at all.
Actually, it's funny. Have you seen an organisation called Karate Combat? Have you seen this?
Yeah.
That's like the latest version of MMA they were trying to develop, wasn't it?
Yeah, I have seen it. Yes.
And you watch it, and I have to admit, I just find it so cringe. I can understand MMA, actually. I find it entertaining, and I've been to see it. I've been to the UFC and seen it and things like that. But I find that the Karate Combat, maybe because of my background in what you're calling classical karate, I do find it very cringeworthy, that side of it.
From a deep-rooted fascination with violence, which I most certainly, it's in my DNA, from ancestry of bare-knuckle fighters and the like, fairground stuff, and sort of father who was a boxer in the army, and then growing up in a rough area and not being a very big kid, so having to learn to look after myself. I have got quite a deep fascination, but so I've watched mixed martial art, but to call that martial arts is well, it's just not the same animal. It's not to develop the grace of a person, whereas classical martial arts are.
Actually, within MMA, there is a divide, because there's some of them, especially some of the sort of ones who've retired now, Chael Sonnen and people like that, who would always claim they weren't martial artists. They would simply say they're prize fighters. And there was like a divide, so they even recognise that themselves in many ways.
Yeah, I think you couldn't call yourself a martial artist unless you studied a classical system for a long time. Doesn't mean to say you couldn't move beyond that classical system, but it still has to be within you. Certainly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the, we were having this conversation earlier, so obviously I'm going to sort of try to get you to come back to that topic, was this idea of César, or how would you describe César, I guess?
And Moxu.
Moxu, the meditation or the short seated silence that's done at the start of a class?
I think it's a classic case of chucking the baby out with the bathwater,
You mean by what classes sort of removed it?
Yeah, many have, but it's right at the beginning of training. For those that don't know, there is a kneeling meditative period at the beginning of a classical karate class. Doesn't generally last for long, mainly probably because there's not much time for training anyway in a human life. You know, we manage a few hours a week in formal training. I think that's, as most people, that's all they can manage with a bit of practice between. So to spend too much time in meditation would use up a lot of dojo time, but it should be certainly for 10, 15 minutes of meditation, but it's generally down to about 2 or 3 minutes. But I think even that serves a purpose. I even think the short period of time serves a purpose.
Okay.
Because to get control of yourself and to calm the mind and to seat the mind in the hara and all those things, to take 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, but if you can do it in 1 minute, it's far more efficient.
Sure.
If you can get there like that. And
Yes.
that's almost the challenge. You know,
Yeah.
it's a bit like when you sit for meditation and first I'm like, mind's here, mind's there, mind's. After a while, you get your mind to where you want to go. Next time you get it, it's quicker to get there. It's quicker to get there. So it's almost like Cesar for me is a challenge to myself of how quick I can get to that, that upright state. I was going to say, you know, well, then again, really, it's the Jing to Qi to Shen process. It's the same thing, you know.
So when I was a teenager and I was going off to university and things like this and leaving this town, I was surprised when I went to other karate clubs around was where I was living that all that was gone. It was the first thing they had removed was the silent sitting at the beginning.
Yeah.
And instead you had a kind of a fitness warm-up or something like this instead.
Yeah. Well, this is a classic thing in most martial art classes, to bounce up and down, do star jumps and the like, and build up as much adrenaline in the system as you possibly can. And it's definitely not my approach. I would do exactly the opposite. I would keep everybody still and opening the body and quietening the mind and focusing on their breathing. Because obviously if you build yourself up to a high adrenal state, well, adrenaline is not an intelligent drug, is it? It's not used for that. It's used, you know, it was used by armies, and certainly the Japanese army in the Second World War, to actually get the students to run towards machine guns, screaming "Banzai!" You know, like it's a stupid drug, and that's kind of stayed within karate's system. That sort of Banzai spirit.
Sure, yeah.
But it's no relevance since peacetime.
No, okay.
You know.
So you would think that adrenaline to practice to try to boost it up in the body would be, from a classical martial art point, a negative then?
Yes, although it was obviously it's going to seep into the system and obviously is useful for aspects, but just that. Seep into the system and control it, not have it control you. If you watch most karate classes, everybody will be standing. They'll generally be quite exhausted from their day's work. I'm not talking children here. I'm never talking about, I don't teach children martial arts. You know, few sort of bright kids or trouble kids, that kind of stuff, you know. But mostly I don't teach children, I teach adults. So they're standing, they're tired after a day's work, and then they sort of jump up and down, wave their arms, do lots of stretches really fast, and then they're standing there and they're in the zone, but they are far too engaged mentally, far too tense, far too intense. But I'm not training them to run against guns. You know, you're training them to actually talk their way out of conflict first. You know.
But even if you're ignoring that level, I noticed doing it with you from a kid that I think I actually got to a stage where my body didn't even produce adrenaline in the same way as other people's bodies did. So when I was going to other classes and sparring with people from other styles, Wing Chun as well, and Shaolin and whatever, wrestling with people, I was noticing that the big difference was no adrenaline kicked in, so my flinch response was a lot less. And there was almost like a natural ambivalence to it. And you realize just how, wherever the others are higher, you realize how effective it is to fight when you get out of that hyped up mindset.
Another human being attacking you in a dojo. I'm not talking about attacking you in general life. That obviously is a much more serious situation. And to be trained for sure. But if you're engaged with somebody sparring in the dojo, the ability to mentally stand off the person and study them,
Yes.
almost as if they're an insect. Sometimes I say,
Right.
and not get too involved with them, not build a relationship, gives far greater benefits.
Yes.
And the mind must be very calm, very very centered, in order to do this. And you don't do this with an immense amount of adrenaline within you.
No.
You know, like if suddenly you had to actually fight 3 people,
Yes.
you know, you did for your life.
Mm-hmm.
You want a lot of adrenaline.
Right. Okay.
You do want a lot of drink because you're going to take a lot of stick, and adrenaline is really good for you to shrug things off. So,
Yes.
you know, so it has its place, but as I say, you want control of it, not it control of you. It's like when you first start Gong and you build loads of qi and it moves through the system and your arms start flying everywhere.
Yeah.
So your qi starts to control you. And eventually you open the channels, you open the gates, and then suddenly you can start to control the qi, how it moves you. Same process.
Yeah,
so
sure.
you control the qi rather than the qi control you. Same with adrenaline.
I think I'd have trouble with that, actually, you know. I tell you why, because I think it's very hard. To control the chi within me would be no problem. To control my spirit, and I don't mean in a higher sense, would be okay. But to actually produce adrenaline in my body is quite difficult. It's quite tricky, because I've even noticed that, you know, like something that makes other people have adrenaline, you know, like something jumps out in your life or makes you jump or a scary scene or there's an accident, it just doesn't get produced
but that's
in me.
why that's again, you see, and sometimes I'll say this, you know, I'll say that when you do external arts, you run on adrenaline.
Yes.
But eventually the adrenaline drops off. And I think it's a difficult I had when I moved from external martial arts to internal martial arts, is because I'd got used to with this cosmic buzz just under the surface, which was keeping me very awake and very sharp of adrenaline. And then suddenly I've come across Tai Chi and no adrenaline. And I was like, oh, this is boring. Oh my God, I've got to actually face myself. I got more than a little bit depressed for a time. But then I started to build qi, and I suddenly realized that qi takes the place of adrenaline.
Yes.
And then, and unlike adrenaline, which is a stupid drug, qi is the clever drug. In other words, it fills your body, it opens your mind, and it opens your perceptions of things. So you replace one for the other, as far as I'm concerned.
That's exactly right. And this is a conversation I was having with someone a couple of weeks ago, actually, that I believe that, and I was saying that the adrenaline and qi are almost diametrically opposed. It's the production.
Yeah.
So when I see people trying to do anything, Tai Chi even, or something like that, and if their art is still very much based on that same fight or flight adrenaline response, they never find the Chi. And it kind of explains why a lot of the arts...
Yeah, I mean, obviously internal arts are an advancement on external arts, and that is the major advancement, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
The transference of one to the other.
Yes.
Because one is, the second one, but the Chi, is awareness of life force. Mm-hmm. And so suddenly you become this entity that is moving, conscious of its own life force. Whereas being adrenaline driven it's like injecting something into the system. It changes the whole thing. Whereas adrenaline just feels natural. It feels good.
I even see it apply in qigong. For example, I've just finished 2 months of teaching qigong. Every single day, pretty much, and having new people in there. Obviously, as you know from classes as well, some people straight away they're okay. They can get in, the dantian can go, and they can start to work on it.
Yes.
Then there's other people who will struggle, and you see they're frustrated, and it's very difficult for them to gather the dantian. It's very difficult for them to find the qi, and even though it's not martial arts, it's still because they're just the ones that can't get it are the ones that are constantly still injected with adrenaline because living in a state of stress, right? They don't realize they're locked in fight or flight. So until they get out of that state, the chi cannot come.
I mean, personally, the way I deal with that is I get them to focus on relaxation, breathing and qua to such a degree that absorbs their mind. And then I think it's quite healthy for people to be in that state because the chi builds slowly. And very often people, you and I both know that very often people that access or learn to build chi very, very quickly and their body isn't ready for it, their mind isn't ready for it, can actually screw them up for quite a long time, can't it? So, I think it's quite healthy when people are, so that's the way I deal with it. I transfer the importance to qua movement, skeletal structure and breathing.
Yes.
And explain that has to be the beginning of everybody's journey because you've got to build the vessel. And I think that works well for people.
But part of the reason as well, if people can access the chi very quickly, is I think that sudden change of state actually throws them back into fight or flight. It actually puts them into the opposite state, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's an awful dilemma for people. It is.
Yes.
You know? Yeah.
Yes. The other thing as well, I think, with you're talking about the transfer from external to internal arts, I'd be curious if you agree on this, is that external arts often build a very efficient set of reactions into your body. And I'm not saying you become reactive,
You should do. Yeah.
but they build good reactions,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So you get
yeah,
very,
yeah.
and I believe that as sensible and as logical that is, internal arts do the opposite. So if there's any reactions built into your body in the internal arts, it's actually wrong. It should be a completely different configuration that you use to practice the internal arts, and that for me was a very difficult switch to change.
Yeah. I think to understand the transfer is necessary. Because of course if a body is reacting promptly to stimuli, in other words, you're reacting fast to an attack, time slows down. It just does. It does. Immediate. What's that part of the brain that controls
Amygdala?
time? Yeah. That kind of cuts in. Well, I'm talking a rather higher level of external arts, but then it's quite logical to be at quite a high level before you transfer things into internal arts.
Yes.
And I think that, so rather than react, you've just got time left.
Yes.
You know, so your perception of time by the time you get to internal arts should be different to most people's perception of time.
Yes.
So there's no rush in what you do. You know, yeah. I mean, my personal experience of flight and fright and adrenal reaction to things. I'm a terrible driver. I'm a terrible, awful driver. Just not good with machines. Wrote a car off. My fault. I think I was actually looking at a girl on the pavement. I hit the guy up the backside, you know, something ridiculously careless of human beings. Smashed the car up. I sat there and I thought, why is my heart not pumping?
Yeah.
You know, I got out the car, I walked round to the car, and the guy, you know, it was my fault. He did, you know, and it was my fault. And he started giving it a bit of verbal and wanted us to have a tussle, you know, in some fashion. And I went, well, you can go down that road if you want to, mate. And it just went boom like this. Sure. So that level of calmness in that situation just didn't excuse my poor driving or my poor decision.
Sure.
But,
yes.
You know, so that's my experience. So I think as a person, you definitely become less reactive.
Yes.
You know, And of course, a person who's less reactive has the possibility of being more proactive in life. So, you know, most human beings, or many human beings, just react to what's going on around them. They couldn't get good at it and their life's okay, but far better to be proactive so you can decide the direction of your life. And I think that's, you know, that can come from internal study. For sure.
I think for internal arts as well, there's obviously one of the key words is to join with the other person. Whether it be pushing hands or anything, any other aspects, even with qigong mission or something like that.
We always had this aspect in our external arts, didn't we? The Japanese exercises, everybody, again, they go as nonsense. Throw them away, where you just link movements together. So you bow together, you make yoi together, you step together. And so right from day one, actually, really, even external arts people should be doing this. Most people have thrown those away. No, they're useless exercises, but they are imperative, in my opinion.
I think that I think it's the reactivity or the reliance on reactions that prevents the joining. I think that's why it's such a fundamental part of the internal arts, which kind of comes back to what you're saying, that adrenaline automatically makes you reactive, right? So therefore, if you're still functioning on adrenaline, you also can't join with the other person because reactivity is, when is reactivity ever appropriate? It never is. It's always too much, too little, or carrying some of our bias or something.
Have good reactions. You know, I mean, Donald Trump had good reactions, didn't he, when he turned his head and just shot in the ear?
He didn't join with it.
No, he nearly did. Nearly joined with him. No, what I mean, there is an appropriate level of reaction, but that only comes from a slowing down of time. You know, I always like the story of there's a famous karate guy, and he was one of my students was a student of his. years ago, and he was fixing a car in the days when human beings could actually fathom out how their own cars worked. And he was changing the starter motor, and he put it to the side. He's obviously upset somebody, and the guy picked it up from behind and went to stove his head in.
Right.
And he said, I stuck my arm up. He did a movement that's referred to as agauki. And he said, it broke my arm.
Right.
But it didn't break my head. So although it wasn't an appropriate reaction, it was definitely appropriate. You know what I mean? It was the best he could do under the circumstances. And that kind of reaction, I think, is, that's useful to human beings, because that could be implied in so many situations.
I'm not arguing against having good reactions. I'm simply saying that the internal mechanism, the body can't be there. Like Agyuki was not done internally.
No. Well, it was done internally in that it was a reaction from his consciousness. So therefore, which is your consciousness is probably the most internal aspect of you, isn't it?
But it didn't follow what I would say the mechanics of an internal art.
No, absolutely not. It didn't follow good mechanics of an external art. It still stopped him having the top of his head caved in, So I like the story.
Yes.
Sometimes all you can do in any situation is the best you can and hope you survive,
So the question would be, if this is the case, then if internal arts especially aren't training reactivity, and it's not what they're aiming to do, not if you go in straight away from the correct mechanics. I mean, most people, when they start the internal arts, like anything, you have to find the information. You're normally being taught them wrong.
Yeah.
So, especially such an abstract art.
Yeah.
But if you are being taught it right from the beginning, is it almost a disservice if you haven't done external arts first that are based upon reactivity and sort of more logical, conventional mechanics?
A disservice? I think when people ask me this, and of course people ask me this quite a bit, I say to them that if you start Tai Chi, it's best if you have some martial art practice. But the trouble is, you see, as you've just said, most martial art practice aren't really martial art practice. They're martial sports. And that's, I mean, even that does have some use in that you've moved the body around in a coordinated manner and that. But also, I say, you want a bit of Gong as well in your thing. So some of that in the mix is a good idea.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, my personal way of dealing with when I have students that are fairly close students, like students that visit me and spend time with me, and that is I teach them some martial arts, the bits that I think are relevant. Or even if they're close to me, I include them in my martial art classes, and I have a specific way of teaching them. And the way I teach them is not to focus in the way that modern karate does, because modern karate was simplified in order to popularize it again. So they had a sort of contractive end to everything. Yeah. Whereas originally, external arts and internal arts are much more similar than people imagine. And actually, like the punches were programmed to move down through gravitational pull to a natural conclusion, and the shoulder sat and the elbow was heavy. So you kind of had these qualities already in martial arts, which were stripped away in order to simplify. So everybody just contracted for a moment, which obviously is not healthy for Tai Chi. So if I'm teaching somebody who is or expresses an interest in continuing their training beyond martiality, I teach them slightly different to I teach people. Other people.
The conclusion I came to, I guess, was a little different, but it's that I tried teaching internal martial arts as a martial art, and it ended up a bone of contention in the wider community, because people say, if you're not teaching Tai Chi as a martial art, it's not real. Yeah. And yet, as far as I can see, hardly any of them are doing it as a martial art, or if they are, they're not doing Tai Chi. So So
I mean, the thing I sometimes say to people when I'm teaching, particularly if I'm teaching courses, I'll be doing something and I'll go, people say that Tai Chi is no good for martial arts.
Yes.
And I just think not very good martial artists, because actually this single concept changes everything I do as a martial artist.
Totally, because I've never met someone who's actually any good at internal martial arts from a martial perspective, unless they already have an extensive background in an external martial art. Yeah. I've never met anyone who's done pure internal arts, just Tai Chi, and then they're really good at it.
No. And it's a crying shame.
Yes.
Because we should be. Why would you not study? external arts. You know, like,
Yes.
so within your study, everything is applicable. I think most people would say this, you know, so like herbs, food, medicine, exercise, blah, 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 blah. Why not martiality? You know, so I think, you know, so I think, yeah.
Well, the problem is a lot of people come to it too late. Because by the time you get to a certain age,
and then it's hard to find anybody that would. I mean, I
Yes.
teach age-appropriate martial arts.
Sure.
I'll teach somebody of 10 and somebody of 70
Yes.
in the same class do the same thing in a completely different way.
Sure.
You know, so it's age-appropriate to each person. Takes a lot of intricacy in your mind. You know, it's quite hard to do. But I've done it for a long time, so I'm very practiced at it. But I think martial arts teachers should all be able to do this. I think otherwise, what are they doing? They're saying that when a body is in its prime, that is the martial art, and everybody else has got to do it less than that, and it's just not the way of things, you know.
But if somebody comes at 50, say 55, 60, and they've got mortgage, kids, jobs, time gets less and less and less for people as they get older. It's not even how many years they've got left, is it? It's kind of like how much they can put. And some people are trying to squeeze out. It ain't going to be long
before they're 60, is it? And their kids are kind of gone. So if you just pretty them along for 10 years, teach them what you can, eventually get to a place where they've got more space in their life.
Sure.
You know, and I'm 68 this year, and okay, I've been training a long time. And I don't train as I used to. I mean, you know, I don't have, you know, my kicks and in terms of performance, terribly. If I had to fight somebody, they'd have to watch me feet. They really would.
Sure, yeah.
They're very accurate, very low. They give a lot of pain. You know?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. And why wouldn't a human being want to be able to protect itself? To me, it's a bizarrity that human beings don't think this should be part of human education. Why would a human being want to walk around this planet and be vulnerable to other human beings? I don't understand personally. So
no, I think it sits at the root of a lot of people's behaviour as well. I mean, the more insecure you are, the more likely you are to lash out. I don't think it's part of the, you know, which is not rocket science. I think it's part of the reason why people are so pretty awful to each other all the time is because they simply don't have that side to their nature.
Totally.
Didn't Yeshiva say every man thinks bad of himself for not having been a soldier?
Not having been a soldier, absolutely. I don't agree with him.
But military fighter.
I don't agree with his soldier thing at all.
Yes.
No. I don't think this soldier is a very moral thing at all, especially in this day and age.
Well, I assume it was a metaphor for a fighter or somebody who could look after themselves.
Yeah. I just, why would people not want to look after themselves? And often people have said to me, I've said this to groups of people, and somebody's gone, yeah, it's all right. You're a big, strong man. You should have seen me as a boy. I wasn't a big, strong boy. I was a little skinny thing who decided, no, I do not want to be vulnerable all my life. And so I think it has to be a conscious decision of human beings. You know.
I come to a different conclusion to yourself, I guess, in that if people are coming, I recognise that with limited time, I think that path of external martial arts proficiency prior to internal arts is such a long route for people that I end up just very clearly pointing out that we're doing Tai Chi to study something else. So we're doing Tai Chi for your mind and for your body and for your health, and we'll study some push hands and some applications, but you should understand that you're kind of skipping A and B and you're coming straight to C. So there's all these kind of things we can get from it.
Yeah.
But maybe we shouldn't worry about proficiency of combat at this stage in life.
This stage in life, yeah.
And it's not most people's concern either when they're older.
No. Well, actually, I don't know. No, see, I don't know as I agree.
It shouldn't be their concern.
Within their psyche, I don't know. I mean, you know, I haven't personally experienced. I do not feel vulnerable physically around other human beings. When that will start to happen, maybe, you know, my 80s, if I survive that long, might start to happen. I've got my doubts. You know, I don't feel vulnerable. I have met lots of people in my age group who feel really vulnerable around other people because they're getting frailer.
Yes.
You know, and you know, the world isn't getting kinder. So I think probably those people do have a craving for it deep in their psyche, but it's so far away from what they perceive to be their, and then they could be right, you know, because where do you find people who teach martial arts with a caring attitude? You just don't find them. They're just not there.
But then you also started younger. Well, you didn't start martial arts particularly young, but you started fighting young. So
Well,
often,
that's why I wanted to be proficient,
yeah.
because I'd lost all my teeth and it was getting a bit depressing.
When you get someone who's say in their 50s again, and they've had 50 years of fear
Yeah,
of any kind
yeah,
of confrontational violence,
yeah,
that's even if the proficiency of skill goes up, say they get really, really skillful, that's
yeah.
a lot of unwinding of neurological patterns of
It
fear
it
of violence.
is,
A
but
lot to undo.
your own, if you're trying to help somebody in a
Hmm.
direction, I don't know if it's that important how far they go in that direction. I mean, somebody has a fear of something,
Hmm.
and you help them 10% of that fear, it's better. They can live there.
Sure.
Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I get it.
So you know, I'm not saying that if somebody starts martial arts later, you're going to turn them into, but if you can just help them so they don't feel so insecure in life. You know,
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is a big thing for people.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm if an epitaph on my, you know, sorry, an inscription on my headstone. If they just put "Here lies Paul, and he always did his best," I'll be really flipping happy with that. You
Sure.
know, yeah,
Yes.
absolutely,
There's
yeah.
there's a whole sort of, I don't know how aware you are of the politics in the Chinese martial arts scene.
I don't have great knowledge because I'm
No,
not.
because you stay out
I
of it a
don't.
bit.
Yeah, I don't
But
really
you get
see.
these. Actually, it's the same as the Japanese martial arts scene. I remember from when I was younger that you have the big fish in small pond where people kind of throw their weight around, and there's some teachers that survive on the kind of reputation of intimidation more than anything else, and they definitely don't help their students overcome fear because they generate it
Mm,
as much as anything.
yes.
And I've met some of these characters, and it's amazing when I've seen them in a group how everyone, it's almost like they maintain, even within their seniors, like an aura of everybody's a bit standoffish, and the conversations around, oh, don't mess with him, or something like that. And I come to realize their power is the same as the power that many people with intimidation in the world have, is that they have to cause you to be, first of all, frightened of physical or even verbal, just frightened of confrontation. So they rely on everybody having a nervousness of not even physical but verbal confrontation, which I guess verbal confrontation is normally backed up by it could turn into physical confrontation.
Mm,
And then you also have to, the other person to be intimidated has to have a fear of actually being physically damaged. You know what I mean?
yes.
So I came to realize that one of the most useful thing in martial arts for myself is A, not being frightened of confrontation, and then also if I lost the confrontation, not actually that frightened of physical damage anyway.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
once those two are gone, it's not
And
possible for anyone to intimidate you after
absolutely,
this. Because what are you going to do?
absolutely.
Hurt
Yeah,
me?
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, first thing I'd say about somebody who's running an organisation like that, where people are actually physically intimidated by them, is they're pathetic.
Hmm.
You know, like, you know, I sometimes have students that I've had for decades, so they know a lot about me. You know, they've seen
Yes.
me, they've studied me. They haven't had much choice. They're like, "What's he doing now? I've got to copy it." You know, they've studied
Yes.
me. I think. I think people, you know, they can see into your very psyche. And there was this Japanese teacher who said, "I don't like doing form because when I do it in front of people, they can see inside of my soul." And
Oh, really?
everybody went, "Oh yeah." They
Okay.
went, "Oh, isn't this profound?" And I thought, "What's wrong with your soul, man?
Yeah, that's
Why are
something
you
you want to
frightened to
share.
see what's inside your
Okay.
soul?" Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, somebody I know, we both know, would know who I'm talking about. I won't say who it is because
Sure.
it was a bit insulting, I guess. But I always sprung to mind, and everybody thought, "Oh, isn't that profound?" And I thought, "No, I think that's pathetic."
Yeah, sure.
I'm always happy. I hate doing things in front of people. I spend my life doing things in front of people.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
know, I hate it because I'm self-conscious. I'm still inside of me. I'm still that scrawny little kid I was, like we all are.
Yes.
You know, taught myself to not have his perception of life and the like. But inside, I'm still very self-conscious. So I glorify in doing things in front of people so they can see who I am.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
then it means if they can see who I am and then they decide not to train with me, that's good. And if they see who I am and they think, yeah, I want some of this, there's an honesty, there's an integrity here, and they stay,
Okay.
my job is
Yes.
done as far as I'm concerned, you know, on some level.
Yeah, the best
Yeah,
teachers I've had globally, East and West, are the ones that are completely open about who they are,
yeah,
their family life and the
yeah,
way they do things and
yeah,
things. And the ones that maintain a kind of aura or boundary or border or you can't really learn off them. There even comes a limit on what you can even
Yeah,
take from them
yeah,
anyway.
yeah,
You
totally.
can learn it. You can learn the shape of a
Yeah,
body
yeah,
movement or something, but not
yeah.
much else.
No, no, absolutely. No, no, and this is classical stuff again, isn't it? This is
Hmm.
what we're still talking about what makes a classical art as opposed to a
Sure.
modern art. You know, I
Yes.
think it's almost impossible for two human beings. Well, it is impossible for two human beings to agree on every subject in
Well, they
every the
shouldn't.
same way because it means one is being compliant, isn't it?
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
that's not
Yes.
agreement, is it?
Oh,
You know,
that,
I've been married for 35 years and I've never had an argument. Bully or
yeah, that's true.
pussy, one or
Yes.
the other. Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
Yes. I mean,
absolutely.
I think maybe that's also where maybe that's the other thing that comes in with the intimidation from another human being as well, because the less intimidated you are, the more you can disagree with people. So therefore, the more you can have your own views, because otherwise you get to that point where the bigger person is always right.
Yes.
So if two people have an argument and I say the sky is green and you say it's blue and I'm bigger than you, then it's green. You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah,
not
yeah.
it's not a good mindset. But I've seen that
No.
used as an example
Yeah,
recently,
yeah.
as if that's a good thing.
Okay. I mean, often in men that are
Yes.
intimidating. Women, that's another subject. Don't get involved. Women who are
Yes.
intimidated, just be intimidated, you know.
Yeah.
But men that are intimidated, you know, like if you break them down to back to their childhood again,
Yes.
are generally overreacting from fear. And
Sure.
my experience has been all my life, you know, as a drinker. You know, when I was younger, I was very much a sort of drinker, hanging around pubs every night and stuff and getting into
Yes.
trouble. And I met loads of these people that everybody, oh, don't go near him. And I would always go near them, obviously. And within minutes, we'd be standing at the bar laughing our head off because I would understand that actually they were overreacting from being intimidated as a
Hmm.
child. And so if you went up and were just open and honest and friendly within minutes, even when they were blind drunk, they were the friendliest people under the sun. Of course,
Sure.
people are going up and treating them with fear. It was like being frightened in front of a bear. You
Sure. Yeah.
know,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I've never found that type of
That's
person
how we're supposed to do with a
intimidating.
berry. You're supposed to stand. I don't know. I
You
never
buy him
know.
a beer, mate. You just
Yeah,
buy him a beer.
I hope
That'll
I
do.
never encounter a
Have a
bear
beer,
because
son.
my brain will be going through all the things I've seen online. What you're supposed to stay still or get smaller? I don't know. But
Peel my
yeah,
feet.
yeah.
No, I don't
Well,
know.
I live in
Something.
Bali. There's not a lot of bears.
No, it's not in England, thankfully. Well, not thankfully, I'd like it. Yes, but you know, so I think that whole thing about intimidating men, you know,
Yeah, sure.
is you know, it's mostly a nonsense.
It happens a lot in the Tai Chi world, and it's. I think the Tai Chi world is definitely definitely that marker of a big fish in a small pond, because the vast majority of people that come into Tai Chi are not really interested in
Very
combat. Not even it's like
gentle,
no.
comes up frail and gentle and
And
kind, and
yeah, and an
you
interest in
know,
the sort of philosophy and
yeah,
culture
yeah,
and
yeah, totally,
spirituality of the art,
totally, yeah,
and
yeah.
then you get these sort of
And then you
idiots
get the others, of
that
course. You get the others,
the
the
big
martial
fish.
art wannabes,
Yes,
you know, that think they're going to bypass all that hard, sweaty work and
yes,
hitting bags and getting hit and all that stuff, which
yes,
obviously, if you study martial arts for decades, you've had lots of that stuff going on, you know what I mean?
yes,
And they think they're going to bypass it by being able to pass gin into somebody and bounce them, and everybody
yeah,
will be impressed with their manhood. And
yes,
they're the worst. They get on my nerves, you know. Yeah, seriously. You
sure,
know, like if somebody wants to be good at combat, go and learn to hit things first.
sure.
And if they don't want to be good at, don't do it. Don't do it. You know, do as you say, study Tai Chi for its deep philosophical balance of yin and yang and building of chi and all those things. You
Which is
know.
a more than valid path and
Well,
enough
of
to keep you
course.
busy for a
Well,
lifetime.
absolutely, several
I
lifetimes.
mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I think similar with yourself. Tai Chi and the internal arts pulled me out of martial arts in many ways. Like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
fascination with that, it was like,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
now I'm doing this other thing that I never planned on
I have
doing.
no
Or yeah,
fascination for violence in any way, shape, or form.
no,
But I'm still quite pleased to be able to deal with it
sure, yeah,
because it's like
yeah,
it's a metaphorical problem. You know,
hmm,
an attack from a human being, as far as I've always been, well, for the longest time concerned in martial arts, is just a metaphor for a major problem and you staying calm and dealing with it. It's as simple as that,
sure,
you
yeah,
know, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, aside from teaching Tai Chi, maybe people wouldn't necessarily understand this or listen, but I'm also a businessman on lots of levels, and not even necessarily within the school I'm doing, but the other things I manage, properties and things like that.
And as you know, I'm definitely not a business.
Yeah, I didn't get that from you, did I?
No,
I had to learn that, but it's that's where I get attacked, if you like. It's that kind of thing. It's dealing with people on a sort of day-to-day basis from business.
People who attack other people because they're successful.
No, I mean within business, it's like when you're dealing with someone, like the subtle intimidation that can come from somebody when there's a business transaction going on.
I see. Oh, yeah.
Do you get what I mean?
Of course.
You come to realise that's when you see how well it transfers over, that you can just give them a big smile.
Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about when I say people can come at a later stage and you can help them with 10% of their, that, so they're no longer actually intimidated by. Yeah,
totally. That's a more realistic martial arts.
Of course, that is the intention of martial art. Ultimately, sure. In peacetime, in wartime, it's so you can kill people with your bare hands if you really have to. And why wouldn't you want that skill at a time like that?
Let's hope we never go back there. But
I'm quite the statement in it. It's a very common statement. Better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And that is definitely my philosophy of martial arts. I'd rather be able to do something I really had to. But
do you know, it's true, that saying, but it's become one of my pet hates. And I'll tell you why. Because it's always the comment people put underneath YouTube videos when you say that you might have something. It's the equivalent of people writing, like Mike Tyson says, everyone has a plan till you get punched.
If you've never heard it before, though, you'd like it as a statement.
Totally. But when you see these days, I go, such a cliche.
The other statement I like that I use sometimes is...
So don't put that under this video. It's too much of a cliche.
If I was told I had to chop a tree down for in 6 hours, I'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening my blade.
I've
I
never
like
heard
that statement.
Okay.
It's a good statement, though, isn't it? And I think training's like this. Certainly Tai Chi's like this, 4 hours, just preparing everything, getting it exactly sharp and right. And to me, that's what training is, really.
If I had 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend 4 hours trying to find someone I could convince to cut the tree down.
Yes, that's very true. Or I'd just pop down and buy myself a chainsaw. But,
So there's one saying I want to ask you about, that when I opened the retreat centre in Sweden, how long ago was that? Years and years ago. It was written above the door, and even though it's primarily a Japanese saying, it was obviously something that was very prominent when I was younger, and that's that Ken Zenichi.
Yeah, it was a longer statement actually, but I abbreviated it.
Right, okay.
I think Ken Zenichi is an abbreviation. I can't remember the whole thing. Ken Zenichi is the fist means basically the fist and Zen are one, which kind of implies that the study of martial arts and the study of Zen can be the same thing. It doesn't mean to say they are the same thing.
Is this the definition of classical, or is this what separates classical martial arts from, or is it something else?
For me, certainly on some level that's true. Certainly it does. There is an aspect that, most certainly. I think the study of the study in the fist and the study of Zen are basically the same thing, is what the statement is really making reference to. The necessary depth that one has to go into, because the study of martial arts is obviously goes beyond the study of combat. I mean, the word art denotes that. I've never liked sport. I've never been a sports person. Not because I fear physical competition. I'm just not interested in it. But I think art is the way is a method for human beings to lift themselves beyond the mundane, so it has a sort of a spiritual aspect to it. And so I would say the correct study of the fist is the same as the study of Zen.
Maybe the Japanese guy you're talking about, it wouldn't express his soul, so people could see it. Maybe he's missing the art, because maybe that's what the art does. It enables that part of you being the soul to be a part of what you're doing as well.
Yes, maybe. I think to fully put yourself into something and not just see the obvious outcomes and benefits. That's art to me, and that is Zen to me on some level, for sure, Okay. And the original statement was the sword and Zen are one.
Right.
So the fist and Zen are the fist and Zen are one was taken from the statement the sword. So I think when we think of the Japanese sword, certainly the one we would all think of is the katana with its clean cuts. I think this is very much where the mindset was, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly by changing it to the fist and Zen one, you take out quite a lot of the risk. There were a lot of it.
Well, again, you'd have
a
to go
4-foot
back to
razor blade.
the history of the system. That the person who made this statement, Sensei Gichin Funakoshi, was head of the Shotokan system. And when you think of who his teachers were, his main teacher was called Itosu. He had another one called Azato, who had a teacher called Matsumura, who actually taught Funakoshi as well, was still alive when Funakoshi was training. They were all bodyguards of the kings and queens of Okinawa, unarmed bodyguards, of course, because there'd been something like a 300-year ban on weaponry use on Okinawa. So
by Westerners?
By Japan.
Oh, by Japan. Oh, right.
Yeah,
they
China
were occupied.
for a time, strangely. I think a long time in history, but Japan had imposed it.
Right.
Okinawa was a puppet state of Japan. They had a king and queen, but if they upset the Japanese king and queen, they'd just take them off the throne and replace them with another puppet.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah.
And so
Nothing's
there was
changed.
a group of bodyguards who didn't even profess. They couldn't even be bodyguards. They were scribes.
Right. Okay.
And they stood at either side of the throne to take down the words of the king, but actually they were the bodyguards. And ironically, the people they were frightened of were American Marines.
Right. Okay.
Because American Marines were at this time, Admiral Perry was trying to break Japan make Japan into a trading nation, because Japan had not traded with the outside world, and the West wanted what they had, you know. Or were really interested. They didn't even know what they had because they wouldn't trade with them.
Yeah.
You know, so they used to threaten Okinawa in order to frighten the Japanese.
Right.
They even took cannons and faced them at Shuri Castle. And the leading people that formulated Shotokan were the bodyguards of this king and queen. And the other people they also feared, or they had to deal with, were Western whalers.
Oh, right.
Who used to turn up at Okinawa while they were whaling in their seas, you know, and they wanted alcohol and women.
Right. Okay.
And the Japanese have forbidden the Okinawans to let them have alcohol and women, and then not given them any arms to stop them. And of course, the whalers had turned up with muskets and sabres.
Right.
And the Okinawa, the Matsumura, Itosu, and Azato were the three main ones that would meet them at the port and refuse to let them come in.
Right. Okay.
So you can imagine the confrontations. You know?
Yeah. They had to stand
and
down
they all
muskets.
survived it, and then they were Funakoshi's teacher. You know.
Right. I've seen the arguments within karate that some of the shapes, like Gudan Barai and things, have relationships to fighting muskets and what you call it, the blade on a gun.
Certainly later
bayonet.
Forms. Certainly later forms had this kind of stuff, sort of grabbing a sentry's rifle to ram the butt into their faces and stuff like this. For sure. Yeah. And they're even saying these days that the modern dojo, with its oak floors and bare walls, were actually a mock-up of Shuri Castle's main hall.
Why is that?
Because that was their practice place. Because if they had to confront people, they had to confront people in the castle. It would be in the main hall.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And so it's why lots of karate moves. Funny, isn't it? Actually, because when lots of martial artists, when I've taught Tai Chi around them, have gone, "Why is there so many pushes in Tai Chi? Pushes aren't very offensive." And yet, if you're in a castle defending your king, pushing somebody's head into a hard stone wall or slamming it into a corner of a table would probably be your chosen method. So push is more useful than punches, essentially.
Yeah, sure.
You know? So rich history, rich and interesting history. You know, which of course, because they were bodyguards of the king and queen, it was their holy duty. And in the system that I practice, on some level, this still feels like this. It's sort of woven into the system. Like the whole thing is like a holy duty to get it right. But
Okay.
only if you follow it classically. If you follow its modern version, it's so you win a point and get a trophy and go home and Mummy says like, well done. You know
Okay,
what I mean?
sure. The history of lots of the martial arts are a bit like that, aren't they? I mean, if you take the art out of where it's developed, the context, and all of a sudden the movements kind of lose. Again, I guess it becomes traditional rather than anything, like a tradition of doing something without really understanding where it's from.
Yeah, well, most are like this. I mean,
Because
most
Bagua
people's
Zhang was a
understanding of
bodyguard's
this.
art the same as well, right? And Bagua Zhang has hardly anything in the way of obvious, clear defensive movements, dodging and evading.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but again, it was because often they put their body between the person they were protecting and the target. So it
Of
had
course. I mean, you know, teki
yes,
kata,
yeah,
naihanchi originally, meaning that sideways or oblique fighting,
yes,
you know, with arm bars in it, grabbing hold of people. Even the end of Heian Sanda, and that term where it looks like your elbow saying you've actually got somebody here between
sure,
you and some knife wielding people. I mean, in external arts, in my opinion, the translation of the moves of the forms is equivalent to the internals of Tai Chi.
sure,
And
okay,
if you
yeah,
took the internals out of Tai Chi, it's no longer Tai Chi. If you took
yep,
the application of forms out of external arts, it's no longer
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that art as far as I'm concerned. And really that's what always draw my interest because I'm always interested in what's behind the curtain. I'm that guy and I
yeah,
want to see what's behind the curtain. So in
yes,
external art, that's what fascinated me, the translation of the movements in the kata, because you can learn the mindset of the time, you know what I mean? And then in internal arts, obviously it's movement of chi and yeah.
and spending lots of time in Asia, including Japan. Not lots of time. I've only spent some time in Japan. But looking around at some of their classical, even their art and their literature, going to their museums and speaking to people there about sort of the old ways of Japan, one of the big differences that I realize is in the West, our approach to martial arts would be you win and you survive.
Yes.
Whereas in Japan, that's not necessarily the
No.
case. You
No.
win, but whether
Yeah,
you
you
survive
survive.
is.
Well, if you're a bodyguard,
Yes.
your survival isn't as important as
How you die is more
well,
important than
modern
not dying to
bodyguards
them.
again go back to Trump's attempted assassination.
Sure.
They obviously care more about their safety than his, but
Yes.
I can't say I blame them actually. No, that's true. But no, I mean, if you had a bodyguard, your holy duty. No, it wasn't always suspect. The idea was you'd throw yourself into the middle of 9 knife sword wielding people
Sure.
and
Yeah.
deal with them as best you can, so the next person had less of them to deal with, so you wouldn't necessarily survive the
And then
situation.
because of the very, very strong beliefs of the time, or the religion and the spiritual beliefs, then how poised they were at that moment of
Yeah,
that inevitable death
yeah,
became very important to them because of how they believed it went into the afterlife and things like this.
well, absolutely. I concur. I agree. How you die is really important. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I think that's a bigger part woven through classical martial arts than sometimes people realise.
Yes, yeah, but well, in Westerners realise,
Yeah,
modern Asian people as well, because they've taken on our rubbish, haven't
yeah,
they? Our shallow view of life. Everything is money.
yeah.
Everything else is secondary. You know, so which is a sadness, isn't it? It's sadness, but yeah, yeah. I don't think there's many good arts left around. I don't think there's many good internal or external arts around, but it makes them more worthwhile to help them survive and propagate them within
Yeah.
people. Definitely, I feel as a teacher and stuff, I do feel my duty is to translate them as close to their highest levels as I can. You know
Yeah, sure.
which is good for training, isn't it? Because it
Mm.
means you have to study yourself at a higher level as you can. So it's a good motivator, isn't it? That sort
Yes.
of guilt thing.
There's also you can see a little bit like these days you can't do anything without people talking shit about you, and I'm sure it's been the same all the way down through history or whatever, and the
Yeah,
internet's
yeah,
amplified that. But now
yeah.
you're seeing people talking shit about the sort of past masters. So people in Tai Chi, I don't know about the karate world, but they will pass comment. I'm sure they do on Funakoshi, but people will pass comment on like Yang Chen-fu or Chen Manqing, and say, oh, it was rubbish compared to this person or that person, and it's which is weird to discuss people you never met who've been dead for many generations
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
because you'd never know.
yeah, yeah.
But it's you can see that there's a kind of disrespect amongst the sort of crowds if they weren't like an undefeatable fighter. So you see someone like Chen Manqing, who whatever people think of him, Chen Manqing was known as not just Tai Chi, but his calligraphy and his study of poetry and
And we
culture.
must remember the head of Beijing Martial Arts Society for many years. I mean, they didn't put
Yeah.
him there as a complete idiot, did they?
No, but what I'm getting at is like in the East also there was, as well as whatever their capabilities martially, there was also the other side, the philosophy and what's happened in the Tai Chi world is some of the sort of heads of the Tai Chi or masters that came after that eschewed all philosophy and just said it was all crap and it's just for fighting, and now the ones that are kind of lifted up and exalted as the kind of, this is the great master or something like that. And I think that is I can kind of see that that's a sign of where it's going the wrong way.
That as an older man, so know, as I say, I'm not. I don't consider myself to be old, but I certainly ain't no spring chicken. And my perspective, that is how I can. Obviously, I can trace how I thought of my training in my 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Now in my 60s, nearly in my 70s. Perspective changes.
Yes.
And so if somebody is revering a master and he is in his 60s or 70s or 80s and his mindset is still fixated on how to fight other human beings, I think they should feel sorry for the person because something's gone wrong in the person's psyche, in my opinion. Yes. Obviously, a psyche should develop so far beyond that. And certainly if it's going to get, the person is going to be revered in any way, they should have developed beyond that.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. And many have, but appear not to, because they still, they've got a lifestyle to maintain. So they need people, because they know idiots, and there's lots of idiots in this world. I don't know if you notice, they worship that aspect of their persona. And so they pretend to still have it. But if you actually went around their house with them, there'd be a nice, gentle person who would make you a cup of tea and, talk to you like you're a human being. Yeah.
I guess it's similar, in Western arts.
Tail wags the dog is the saying, isn't it?
Boxing or MMA or something, maybe transferring from a fighter to a coach, and then the coach still gets respect, I suppose, is the closest thing that we would have in sort of Western culture.
I guess.
But it's still not the same as the...
I'm still of the thing. See, I don't like... I'm not a competitive martial art. Never have been. Never been a sports thing. But I can really respect people who can go out and fight each other hard and then stop, take a breath, bow to each other politely and just walk away, win or lose. Yeah. That is the bit. And again, this is really Cesar stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Modern mixed martial arts, like this, like a child of 12. I can't respect that. I'm sorry. Sure. I could maybe respect their technique, their endurance, their ability to take that much pain or hard work, but I can't respect the person.
I think the thing I always had the discomfort when I went to UFC events, I've been to boxing events as well, both in Vegas. Yeah. So you imagine the size of a boxing arena in Vegas and an MMA. There's a lot of people there. And I don't know, the boxing was in New York actually, but anyway, but big crowds. But I realised that what I had the issue with wasn't the people fighting, that they decided to fight, it was the crowds.
Yeah.
And I realised it was like, could I get an arena? I was like, yeah, sure, I could fight someone like that, but it's the crowds. It's having the crowds I found utterly distasteful. It almost, like, to do that for the entertainment of
those people.
Of people that I just realised that I would have zero respect for, with a drunken, just everything in the state that
probably couldn't punch their way out of a soggy paper bag. I mean,
Yes.
Somebody said the other day, what is the worst kind of fighter? It's the guy that goes, well, I've never done any training, but when it kicks off, I just turn into an animal. I think there's a lot of men that think that's how fighting works. Yeah, sure. I'm sorry, they haven't got a clue,
No, when you see, I had an apartment in Cardiff, right over the street for a little while, where everybody would drink on a Saturday night, and I used to watch all the people stumbling around. And there was more damage done from people drunkenly walking into the lamppost than anything else.
As a teenager, I worked on the Channel Tunnel.
Yes.
And it was all Irish, but there was also a naval base in the town. And obviously the Irish and the Army and the Navy, it was the time of the bombings in London, the IRA were doing it, and the Irish I was living with all pro-IRA. I was only a sort of teenager, and 17, I think, working on the Channel. I don't know what I was doing. Anyway, we'd go out on a Friday night, and invariably a group of the Irish with me and my brother would end up in one of the Navy bars.
Right.
And watching drunk Irishmen try to fight was just out of this world. Invariably they'd miss and spin 3 times and fall down. You're like,
Yes.
crikey, you did it again.
It was like this.
Drunk people fighting with no training.
Yeah.
You know.
But it's surprisingly hard to coordinate your limbs. Even that, like you get people coming along and they want to understand like release and song and mobilizing force and that. And, and then when you start to teach them, then you realize you've got some work to do, like to know where their arms and legs are, and to know their own feet.
Untrained people. Yeah, it is amazing how and people, of course, they don't know it. People come into the dojo for the first time, and they come in and they go, "I want to do some training." So I go, "Step forward your left leg," and they go, "Oh yeah, that one." They don't know the left from their right. You know what I mean? And then about third time they move, they trip over. They try to hit something. They're like this, and you know, and I just people are awfully uncoordinated naturally.
Very different from the other animals around, isn't it?
Yeah,
you watch any other creature, they just nimbly jump around naturally. But
I laugh sometimes about Tai Chi because so much of the connective tissues of Tai Chi are like an ape.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and people have said, "I'm learning Tai Chi, I'm balancing yin and yang in my psyche." And actually learning to move like a flipping ape. You know, we're getting back some of that naturally, so that connectivity, that bounce.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I have a great respect for the way monkeys and apes move. I think I've studied them a lot because that's what we have the potential for, but we just lost it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That spring that comes into the body, into the joints, I think is probably the most useful thing for people to learn, because I see as people get older, it's like bone on bone for a lot of people past a certain age, isn't it? Just grinding.
Totally. Once you've got expansion in the joints, it's just that bone on bone just ain't there. You know, like I've got a lot of damage in my body from external arts. I mean, there's nobody that's done 40 odd years of external arts and haven't, especially in the era that I did it, sort of 1980s and 1990s. Everybody just went for it as though they were going to be immortal. But because of all the expansion in my joints through the internal arts, particularly Tai Chi, actually bone never touches bone. So my damage never gets realised. Even in my lower spine, I've got some but I've got expansion now in my lower spine, so actually the bones don't touch together anymore. So I think that's kind of what people were doing with expansion. Because obviously when people started developing internal arts, they had done, they weren't kids. They were adults and they did have damage in their bodies. So I think that partially that's what they were trying to do for themselves, you know.
Yeah, and one thing I realised from that expansion, I think that nobody can get it without static work, like standing. I don't think it ever comes from moving. No.
And that's the problem I had because I was obsessed with movement. Right. And as you know, when I first started standing, I was frustrated because I hated standing. But it wasn't the thing that I did, and the thing that I advise other people who have trouble, build loads of chi. Because once you build loads of chi, obviously in the physical body, the awareness of your physical body starts to disappear and you can only feel your energy body. And that is totally fascinating. So all that boredom goes away because your mind absorbs into it. And then, of course, the nature of your mind absorbing into your body is what you're trying to achieve in the first place. So it kind of creates itself. You just have to have stubbornness at the beginning in order to do it. You have to have trust, actually. Which is why mine was always easy, because I got this information for you and I trusted you because you were my son. You weren't going to come, Dad. And if somebody else had told me, I'd gone, just wants my money.
Totally,
There would have been the skeptical side of me, which probably, and I'm sure that ruins a lot of people's training.
I see that literally written with, the key to internal martial arts is the standing work. And then if you want to go deeper into the standing work, it becomes the seated work. And if you go deep to the seated work, is then the mental work. But I see it written, people saying, if you're turning up to learn something and all they're doing is teaching you standing work, then they're ripping you off because you're just standing still. And it shows such a lack. Well, maybe people are doing that, actually. I mean, maybe there are some teachers that do this.
I know, I suppose in martial artists that said of you, asked me what you were teaching. And I said you were teaching meditation. He said, "God, got it flipping made. I'll just get 200 people, get them to sit down." And I was like,
Yes.
Yeah, try and get 200 people to turn up, son. You know what I mean? It's like
Try and get 200 people to trust you to sit
to
with them for
trust
that
you
level of
to
time.
say,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yes.
You got to have something going on, something
Yes.
beyond words.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's always the thing, isn't it? You've got to
Uh,
have something beyond words. People have got to have an awareness.
and I tell you, from a personal point of view, I would feel far less drained teaching movements for a
Yeah,
few days than I would
yeah,
teaching
yeah,
static work. Teaching
yeah,
seated meditation work is the most exhausting thing
yeah, yeah,
to large
yeah.
groups.
Obviously, I have some
Moving around would be
experience
easy.
of this. Yeah, I find it
Yeah.
totally
Yes.
exhausting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, energy will carry itself once you're moving. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
anybody can. It's like if you run for a long way, it's okay. Then you
Yes.
stop and you go, "Oh, Jesus, I'm
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's not till you stop when you feel the effect of it. And I think,
Mm.
yeah, yeah. So
I
yeah,
think as well, like even in your own training, it kind of feels like if you're moving, say you're doing a form, Tai Chi form or something like that, you're inside, you're feeling inside, but there's so many variables in your physical body that you're kind of in and out and in and you're never perfect,
yeah,
are
yeah,
you? You know,
yeah.
because nothing ever is. Whereas when you're totally static, you don't have a choice. You are just literally with all of the discomfort and everything in your
Yeah,
body. It's so much
yeah.
more intense because there's nowhere to go like there is in a
I
movement.
used to say something I've heard you say lots
Yeah.
of times. Oh, I flipping hate checklists.
Yes.
That standing goes through checklists. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's why it's nice once chi starts to rise,
Yeah.
because suddenly you go, oh, well, I'll just let that take governance. Do you know
Yes.
what I mean? And then you can sort of get away from open the shoulder,
Yeah.
teeth
Yeah.
is open. Do you know what I
Yes.
mean? It's like, yeah, yeah. I think the beauty of that is, of course, is once you can achieve this yourself,
Hmm.
once you've got somebody to a certain level,
Hmm.
you can explain it, and actually it doesn't take them long to actually achieve it on
Mm.
some level. Yeah, but the
Yes.
beginning stage, because it's like anything, isn't it? When
Yes.
first you've developed an awareness of chi, it's like 10%, eventually it envelops. I like that word. It envelops the whole of you, doesn't
Yeah.
it? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so you can get people past that initial stage just through a bit of transmission as well, of course. You know, I mean, the times when
Helps.
even when you're teaching Tai Chi, that I'll talk about something like, as if to break across knee and building Janjong as you
Yeah.
come
Yeah.
out of that thing. And I'll explain, I was not long ago, quite recently, I think it was a really nice student that comes very often on things I'm doing, and I was explaining it to him, and he was like, "Yeah, I understand the theory." So I just stood him. He went, "What? Oh yeah, I got that now."
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like immediate stuff that is really
Yes.
useful when you're teaching people. And of
Yeah.
course, I walked off and he'd lost it again, but at least he's experienced it. Do you
Mm.
know what I mean? And, yeah,
That's
but
often missed. That side of teaching the internal arts is almost well, it is necessary.
yeah,
At some
yeah.
stage, there has to be a direct transmission
It's
of
funny actually
from your
because
body
that's
to
what he
theirs.
said to me. He
Mm.
said to me, "I guess teaching this stuff without that ability to transmit isn't really possible, is it?" I went, "Probably not." No.
No.
So that's exactly what he asked me as I said that. You know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it becomes about alignment, which is what a lot of the internal arts have become about. They think is about relax and align,
Yeah.
rather than, part of the reason you align is so you can take the tension off the outside so that
Yeah.
then you can get to the
Yeah.
inside,
Yeah.
and then that's when the process
Yeah,
starts,
which
right?
is
It's
the checklist stage.
yes,
Yeah, but
yes,
it's some people think it's about that's an almost perfect example of people at a beginner level thinking they're seeing the whole picture and then
yeah,
criticizing something.
yes, yeah,
And I'm sure that happens in every art, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like a painter when he has an apprentice.
yeah,
In the
sure,
first few months, you go, "Well, this is nonsense, isn't it?" You know, like because he's got very shallow knowledge of it,
yes,
and that's where criticism of good arts come from. People with a shallow knowledge, and just because they've touched upon it and think they've perceived the whole thing.
yeah,
You
sure,
know,
yeah,
yeah, one has to do a lot of work in order to perceive even a small amount of these arts. You know what I mean?
yeah. And unfortunately, you've realised that small part's normally a much smaller part than you realise that if you
Yeah,
go into it.
yeah. I've never been impatient, you know, and
Yeah.
I'm never somebody who's frustrated where I am. I am where I am.
Hmm.
Is always the way I feel about things, and if it's intended, I get further. I will get further, and if it's
Sure.
not intended, well, I am where I am. Who cares, you know?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. I keep it very philosophical. I always have, you know.
Well, maybe
Yeah,
that's a good note for us to conclude it on.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.